Hey guys, this is Dave with AudioWin, and I have the TRI i3 Mark III. So yet another entry in the already very competitive $200 price bracket. And I will tell you right now, this IM does a lot of things very well. And my initial impressions were very positive right out of the gate, but it does also, of course, have some characteristics that don't necessarily appeal to me. And while those aren't a deal breaker for me, depending on your sound preference, it could be for some of you. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Now on the table, you can see everything that's included with the IEMs. You have the IEMs and cable, of course. It also has a great selection of wide and narrow bore silicone ear tips, and then they've also included some foam tips as well. They also include a case, cleaning cloth, and then a cleaning tool. It's priced at $219, and it actually has a 3-driver tribrid setup, so 3 different driver types. We have a planar driver that handles the high frequencies, a balanced armature driver for the mids, and then 1 dynamic driver for the bass. And that's all housed in these very well machined all aluminum shells. And they're nicely shaped as well. They did a really good job with the way they shaped the insides of the shells, and the nozzle angle and the length are just right for my ear. So I had no issues at all with fit and comfort. As far as the design, it's okay, I guess. I'm personally not generally a huge fan of purple. I do, however, like the contouring and the shaping on the faceplate. Now, as for the cable, it's fine for this price. I think it's a little bit thick and maybe a little bit stiff, but for the most part, it is still quite manageable. Now, one thing I would have liked to see is interchangeable terminations at this price, although I am glad it does have a 4.4 balanced termination, and I'm also glad it uses 2-pin connectors at the earpieces. Now, because of that slightly thicker construction, it can make for kind of a tight squeeze in the case, because the case is a little on the smaller side. It's great for traveling, but you just have to make sure and roll that cable up pretty tightly to get it to fit in the case properly. Okay, let's move on to the sound. So as I had mentioned in my intro, the i3 Mark III does a lot of stuff really well for this price point, but it also does have what you might consider to be some drawbacks as well, depending on your tuning preference. Now, speaking of the tuning, the general presentation of the i3 is what I would consider to be neutral, but with kind of an upper mid focus, because while I do feel like the i3 Mark III is pretty balanced overall, there is no doubt some extra energy in the upper mid range that is pushing vocals a little more forward. So the vocals are kind of the star of the show, so to speak, relative to its tuning. But if we break things down just a little bit further, starting with the bass, this is actually where I feel like the i3 Mark III veers off a little bit in terms of its tuning, because while I do like the bass presentation, and it does have some good characteristics as far as what I look for in a good dynamic driver bass, it's still what I would consider to be a little on the thin side. And that is something I picked up on, not just in the bass frequencies, but in the lower mid-range and the mid-bass as well. So you do have a very clean transition out of the lower mids and the mid-bass, which means you have no bass bleed and nice amounts of lower mid detail and mid-bass texture. However, at the same time, it doesn't give you much in terms of mid-bass punch, and I also feel like it's lacking somewhat in terms of richness and note weight as far as how it portrays male vocals and some of the instruments that land in those lower mids and that mid-bass region. Now, I will say that since the tuning of the bass is more sub-bass focused, it does still deliver fairly decent amounts of sub-bass rumble, which again, that does help support the rest of those bass frequencies quite a bit. And this is the area again of the tuning I referred to in my intro that it wasn't really a deal breaker for me, but it could be for some of you. Now, as you move into the mids, again, the lower mids are a little less weighty than I typically like to hear. However, where the mid-range shines, in my opinion, is in its vocal reproduction, because while it is a little more forward than I typically prefer, it doesn't really ever get to the point where it becomes too much or overbearing. And for vocal lovers, I think most will agree they've managed to find a pretty good balance between making sure the vocals have good center focus and also maintaining the listener's attention, but without them being so forward as to become shouty and overbearing. And another thing I noticed, because of the way they approached the tuning of the ear gain or the pinna gain, and also because of how they handled that transition out of the upper mids into the treble, they've managed to make sure that female vocals or any instruments that land in those upper mids or those higher frequencies maintain a nice, natural, smooth, and controlled presentation. And again, that naturalness and that smoothness is consistent all the way from the mids into the treble and even the upper treble. Now, speaking of the treble, this is another area where I feel the i3 Mark III really shines, because not only does it have that smooth, natural presentation, it also gives me really nice levels of detail and micro details. It's probably among some of the best treble detail I've heard at this price. And even better, it also has good treble extension, so it's delivering nice amounts of air as well. And that's also kind of contributing to those micro details as well. Now, as far as technical performance, we already know detail levels are great. Soundstage and imaging are also quite good. The soundstage is what I would consider to maybe be about average for an IEM, which is fine for this price point. But what is above average is the imaging and layering, because the spacing and those positional cues for instruments and that center vocal are up there again with some of the best I've heard at the $200 price point, which brings us to comparisons. So the areas where I feel the i3 Mark III shines, in my opinion, are in the tuning of the upper mids and treble, and also in its technical performance. And I will tell you right now, its technical performance is on par with the Butterfly 61T, which since its release has been my top IEM at the $200 price point, but I still prefer the tuning of the Butterfly over the i3 Mark III. So the Butterfly does still hold on to that top spot at $200 for me. And then right now, below the Butterfly is the Chopin, which is still a go-to for me because it's really close to my tuning preference, and it is something I'm still more likely to reach for over the i3 Mark III, because again, its tuning is so nice, it's really natural sounding, and I love the way they handled the bass shelf with the Chopin. And then right behind the Chopin is the Performer 5, and this one also is a little closer to my tuning preference as far as the bass levels and just the general tuning. Again, it's just closer to my preference. Now, I do feel like the i3 Mark III has better technical performance than both the Performer 5 and Chopin, but it's not by a very wide margin. And again, I generally prioritize tuning over technical performance anyway. So for me, as impressive as the upper mids, the treble, and the technical performance is with the i3 Mark III, it's still just a little too thin and lacking in its bass energy, again, for my preference. And I also feel like I'm missing some of the lower mid richness as well. And the Butterfly, the Chopin, and the Performer 5, while all having slightly different tuning flavors, still bring that bass energy that I like. And they all come just a little closer to my preference. Plus, they also sound really natural. And while they may not, again, all have the detail levels and technical performance that the i3 Mark III has, they do come very close. And again, I'm typically going to be prioritizing tuning over technical performance. Now, all that said, those are just my preferences. And if you are okay with a little less bass and are a vocal lover and want to hear some incredibly well-tuned upper mids and treble combined with really good technical performance, and again, you're trying to stay within that $200 price bracket, then I would definitely recommend you giving the TRI i3 Mark III a listen, because it does all of those things very well. So that concludes my review of the TRI i3 Mark III. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.